You know, some mysteries feel like they're just destined to stay that way, unsolved. They get filed away, the trail goes cold, and that's it. Well, this is the story of one of those cases. A really brutal murder, a hunt that stretched for 27 years, and a tangled web of lies that all came down to a phantom informant and one tiny clue.
That's what Detective Larry Cook said when he arrived on the scene back in 1987. It was a truly grim sight. The victim was a woman named Anna Mae Florence, and she'd been attacked right inside her own apartment. She was just waiting for her sister and brother-in-law to pick her up to go shopping. Just a totally normal day that suddenly turned into an absolute nightmare.
So, from the very beginning, the investigation was just pure chaos. You've got a key witness, a suspect fleeing the scene, and inside, the first piece of a puzzle that would take decades to solve. Okay, so picture this. Her brother-in-law, Alonzo, arrives and finds Anna Mae on the floor. She's still conscious, but she's fading fast. He asks her, "Who did this to you?" And with her last breaths, she just says, she didn't know. And then she was gone. The scene was violent, it was brutal, and it left behind almost no clear leads. Almost. You gotta remember, back in 1987, DNA analysis wasn't really a thing yet. So when investigators found a single, partial, bloody fingerprint on the wall, it was like striking gold. They were so determined to preserve this one piece of evidence, they literally cut that section of the wall right out. This print, this was their only physical link to the killer. The case completely stalled out. And then a mysterious tip came in. It was a single phone call that seemed like the big break everyone was praying for. But what they didn't know was that this call would send them down a path of deception that would last for nearly 30 years. So who was this guy on the phone? Well, he wouldn't give his real name. He claimed he was at a party and overheard a woman actually bragging about being involved in the murder. He was their only hope, just this anonymous voice on a cassette tape holding what sounded like the key to the entire case. So the caller says his name is Odell, and to prove he's for real, he actually gives the detectives his social security number and his date of birth. Then he points the finger at a woman named Danita. Detectives check her out, they take her prints, but nothing matches. And then, just as fast as he showed up, Odell completely vanishes. The case went cold. Again. All right, now let's fast forward 26 years. The year is 2013, and the cold case file gets reopened. A new team of detectives is hoping that a pair of fresh eyes might finally find something everyone else missed. I mean, the timeline here is just staggering. A quarter of a century has gone by. So these new detectives, they go back to square one. They focus on the original evidence. And specifically, 6 old cassette tapes, the interviews with that mysterious informant, Odell. They start listening, just hoping to hear some tiny clue hidden in his voice. And as they're listening to these old tapes, they find it, the smoking gun. Odell mentions that Anna Mae had a welfare check in her purse. Now, why is that so important? Because that fact had never been made public. Only the killer, or someone the killer confessed to, could have possibly known that. This was proof. This informant had real inside knowledge. And right here, this is the moment the whole case gets turned on its head. The detectives track down the real Odell, and they play him the tape. He's totally stunned. He says, "Yep, that's my personal info, all right, but that is not my voice." The proof? The guy on the tape spelled out a street name. The real Odell tells the detectives he can't read or write. It was impossible. So the detectives ask the obvious question. Well, who would know your personal info so well? Odell listens to the tape again, and then it hits him. He says, "You know who that sounds like? My cousin Chris." And why would Chris have his info? Because back in the 80s, Odell was illiterate, so he'd get his cousin Chris to fill out his job applications for him. The phantom informant finally had a name. So, armed with this huge new lead, detectives find Chris. For 26 years, he had been carrying this massive secret, and they were finally there to bring it all out into the light. Chris denies everything at first, but eventually he just cracks. And his motive was, well, it was complicated. See, he felt guilty about the murder, and he wanted justice for Anna Mae. But he couldn't bring himself to betray his friend, who had confessed everything to him. So, he made up a story, he framed a totally innocent woman, and used his cousin's identity to phone it in, hoping it would clear his conscience. But the real turning point, it came from his mom.
Right in the middle of the interrogation, she looks at her son and she says, "You tell them detectives what you know. Too much time has gone by." And with that, the dam just broke. Chris decided it was finally time to tell the truth.
He admitted he lied, that Danita was innocent. He told them the real killer was a friend of his who had confessed to him the day after the murder. After holding on to this secret for 26 years, he finally gave the detectives the one thing they needed most, a real name.
Zena Roberson. That was the name he'd been protecting for decades. And for the first time in 26 years, detectives had a brand new suspect. With a real name in hand, all the final pieces of this puzzle just fell into place with unbelievable speed, bringing this 27-year-old case to a really dramatic end. Detectives quickly learned that Zena Roberson had a criminal record, which meant her fingerprints were already on file. They pulled them and rushed to compare them against that one crucial piece of evidence they had saved all those years ago, that bloody print cut from Anna Mae's apartment wall. And there it was, a perfect match. The fingerprint that had waited 27 years for its owner finally had one. They had her. Zena Roberson was in Anna Mae Florence's apartment on the day of the murder. The motive? Well, it turned out to be just as tragic as it was senseless. Zena confessed she was going door to door trying to get money for a drug debt. Anna Mae kindly gave her a few dollars. But when Zena saw more money in her purse, greed just took over. A struggle started, and it escalated into a brutal, fatal attack. This case is just an incredible example of how persistent police work, new technology, and the massive weight of a guilty conscience can come together to solve the impossible. But it's so important to remember the person at the heart of all this. As her family said, Anna Mae Florence wasn't just a cold case file. She was a beloved person whose life was cut short and who was never, ever forgotten. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other cold cases out there are just one guilty conscience away from finally being solved?